So there was this company and it had really good intentions of helping the community, right? It went out there and it was like, we're going to do all this good stuff. We're going to bring all this great things to the economy. And they got into the mindset of the community that we are in will greatly suffer from our non-existence if we ever didn't exist anymore. And they thought that their company was the only chance to revive the community. So they had decided to do some things to keep the company going. But in doing that, they faced legal issues and they did not stick to their principles.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's in essence, having good principles initially in itself isn't bad, but one has to stay grounded, I think, in that and not become too ambitious in your efforts and
Well,
blinded
this
by it.
company had like such of an idea of we're doing so much good with what we're doing, they left their principles behind.
Right, right. And that's where we can become blinded by those ambitions, where we can be caught up in our own mission so deeply that we forget why we started this, why something was started in the first place. And I hope that the Awen Jedi, we keep that in mind, we keep that in sight, and that people will remind us of that if we start veering, if we don't remain with our mission. And if and this is where humility comes in. Remain confident, that don't get arrogant. And that in itself, the ego can really play a part in this. And yes, wanting to help a community, wanting to help all of that, that's great. I hats off. But if one
You can't get so tied up into it. You can't
right,
leave your principles behind when you're trying to do all this good because then it won't turn out to be good.
right, you'll become something that you wanted to get away from, to not be. You've become what you have fought to not be. You have become that entity. And that in turn will destroy something from the inside. You'll have to pay a cost. And then people suffer. Why? You kept one too close. You didn't stay detached enough to be objective. You let your own personal bias and ideals and idealisms take apart what you held dear. Then when that happens, if you don't see it, you have to go down with the ship. You have to pay your consequences. You have to answer. And people have suffered and do suffer because of that. And that's really not what the initial start and mission and purpose was and the focus. And that's unfortunately not what people want. People become displaced. But then again, there are always warning signs if people don't pay attention. And when that's ignored, I'm not saying you're at fault, but you're part of the problem. People will say things as a indirect warning, but if we're not smart or keeping our eyes open and our ears open, we inadvertently become part of the problem from our own ideals. And I'm not going to touch too much on that because I'm saving that, maybe that specific topic for something else coming up. But then again, our character, what do we stand for? A lot of this has to go with that. You know, the balance of things. There's always going to be some kind of little dark corner in a good thing, and always going to be a little light thing in that dark corner. The yin and the yang, and there's another word for it. There's other words for it. But it's hard to always keep track of that. And I'm not blaming anybody for it, but I'm also saying be aware of your own flaws and your own defects and your own lack of knowledge. Be aware of that. Be self-aware. Know yourself. And your ethics and morals will eventually carry you into a better place if you're still honest with yourself and you're willing to hear, and you don't lead people into a dark tunnel where there's no end, and then you're praying and hoping you can get back out, and you don't fall victim to where you again have to become that person from the beginning, which happens to the best of us. We all have some point in our lives where we've got to start from the beginning again in order to see the error of our ways. You know, a friend of mine told me one time, when the master is ready, the student will appear. That can be ourselves, or that can be a student in search of a master, or a master in search of that one student. See it how you will. But my main purpose in this today is, like I said, a warning. If you're part of something that is no longer accepted, ask yourself why. What are you avoiding? What are you lacking? And if you're lacking it, find it. Don't justify your own purpose in being and become those that are on a watch list, because that's no place anybody wants to be. And anybody can potentially be that and be there. Who wants to walk around with that target on their back where you have no place to go? Who wants to be there? If you had initially intended to be part of something greater and better than yourself, and you end up being on this list, Were you truly in it for the right reasons and the right motives? The upstanding, forthcoming person? I think not. No, I'm leaving those names out, and people in the Jedi community know who they are. That goes without saying. But when you're one of those people and you're related to as that, it's not a good place to be. And the best thing is to not become them. And yeah, I might be indirectly poking the bear on that, but I'm leaving the names out for argument's sake, which is okay. But I think people know who I'm talking about, which I'm okay with that. And somebody just got added to that list by their own doings, which I don't feel bad about. And I'm glad that hopefully this might wake you up. If not, well, so be it. That was of your own making. Because of the guise of one thing, but the underlying motives of a truth. I hope maybe in some way you see the error of your ways at some point, but you were helps. Attempts were made to help you, but instead you made a deal with the devil, and eventually the devil's going to come calling to collect, and then you've got the hounds of hell to deal with too and fight off, and that's a whole lot. It's a whole lot of hounds, and I hope for your own well-being you change your ways. But if you stay true to your cause and to your purpose, then you will have none of those troubles. You'll have none of those problems. And you will thrive. If you stay with standards, if you stay with your principles and stay away from idealisms, then you will flourish. You will grow and maybe have more than you know what to do with, and the fruits of your labor will benefit everybody around you. And that message that you have taught, that has been taught, that is solid and sound and wholesome, will carry on. Just like that pebble in the pond, when the message from the force gets sent out and people hear it, like the breeze and the wind and the leaf that's carried along. But we have to remain also very realistic. And though all of that only carries us so far, but this is when we have to return back to our foundations. And so, and in the light of recent events in the last 72 hours, it's going to be a good message. Though the efforts that were done were very harsh, and I applaud those that took efforts to do it, because that took some real gumption to stand up, and that one person, two people I know, one I know fairly well, and the other I'm working on letting that relationship flourish due to mutual benefits and interest. But if you keep going, you'll be that order that got basically firebombed from the inside, and you crumbled because there was a misleading and your intentions were less than noble, were less than forthcoming. You had ulterior motives. And that, if you get caught, don't come crying home to mama to try to save you and beg. You won't be heard. You could have listened early on and avoided this. And that is your own fault. To anything that falls in that manner, which is not pretty, but it's necessary. So back to be aware when you're in a fragile state. If you're too close, that you don't become blinded by those that would manipulate you. And their intentions from the start are agents of chaos, but come under the shadow of carrying good tidings and a message of a greater being. Don't play that game. Don't get caught up. Those that would be manipulated into that, I feel for you. And, one thing that I'm going to touch on here briefly is that people talk about being a knight and walking around with the title of knight. A knight is not just a talk. A knight is not just something to brandish on your sleeve. A knight is one who is willing to put themselves in the line of fire and take the risk to correct wrongs. It's part of your job description. It's part of your duty. And don't just say you're a knight and just speak words. Speak after your actions have been seen that are notable. And let others speak for you. Don't walk around and brandish it, because that makes you no better than those you help to stop and help to correct. Don't get arrogant about your title. Don't get complacent. Act. And for those that are masters that are misleading for your own perversions, take the recent events of a said order to heart. And maybe if you are a true master, reflect on that and then turn it inwards to your own actions. Because if you're a master and you've worked to get there, it would be a shame to be taken with it, especially and it affects your status and you're no longer seen as a master. that would be a sad day. But then again, maybe there's a reason. Maybe it was an honest, maybe it was a dishonest reason. But however, that's neither here nor there. So think about and where you're receiving your training. Make sure, even though it might not be agreed with on everything, but it's still got a solid standing and it's still around. That will get you off to a good start and meet those standards and expectations and work to uphold them and strive for that. Even though they're going to be tough, it will be worth it in the long run. There's a thing of quality that is overlooked. Quantity is not important. Quality is. If the numbers are low but the quality is high, then you have a 2-to-1 ratio of quality versus quantity. At least. So, but this goes back to the other about orders that end up falling. If you bucked the system on your ideals and end up suffering, you have no one to blame but yourself. Or maybe you were manipulated by somebody that let you think otherwise. Well, I feel bad for you, but there are people that would have the information that you could ask and references. And those are good people to have around. They help this community. They help this group of people. But that, in a way, is what can be a defining aspect. Integrity, persistence. Those are 2 defining qualities. But everybody has to be on board. So, before I lose track of my thoughts again here, I want to put this out and pose the question, and hopefully the realization, that if you're on a runaway train and you're unwilling to put the brakes on, are you willing to pay that cost for your own selfish motives? Remember, dishonesty breeds severe consequences. And if you're willing to pay the price and fork out and pay the cost, go for it. But you have no one to blame. So I'll leave you with that. So I leave that thought with each of you. May the force guide you. Cal Griffin out. Thank you.